What is the scariest thing you've ever seen in your life that you can't explain? When I was a child, both my parents went to work early, so they would drop me off at my grandmother's to eat breakfast and go to school from there. My grandmother died my junior year in high school and I started coming straight home from school. During this time, my mother started complaining that when she get home from work the receiver of the phone, an 80s style corded push-button phone, next to her bed was left off the base. I wasn't using the phone, but she would insist I must have because the phone was hung up properly when she left for work. One day, I got home a little early. Now, I need to pause and tell you about the layout of our apartment. From the front door, I looked directly into the living room, dining room, the door to the kitchen, and the short halfway that led to my parents' bedroom and my bedroom. There was no other door. The windows were old-fashioned narrow casement windows with screens. And we were on the 3rd floor. Anyway, as soon as I walked in the door, I clearly heard 2 footsteps in my parents' bedroom. I dropped my school bag and foolishly ran to the bedroom. It wasn't far and took only a few seconds. I got to the bedroom and no one was there. However, I immediately noticed that the receiver of the phone on my mother's bedside table was on the floor. It was placed so that the cord to the base was stretched out as far as it could go. I later tried to replicate the placement by shaking the table, tipping the phone. I could never get the receiver off the base. When I finally resorted to knocking it off with a finger, it would fall on the table or next to it. The only way I could replicate the placement of the receiver where I found it was to carefully stretch the cord, place it, and hold it for a few moments. It could not have gotten to that spot by accident. When I found the phone, I hung it up and it immediately rang. I answered it, and it was my dad. He asked what was wrong. I asked him why he asked. He said he had called, apparently just before I got home, and someone, he thought it was me, answered the phone but never said anything. He finally hung up and had been trying to call back and only got through after I hung up the phone. I've never figured out what happened. I definitely heard footsteps and I'm just as certain there was no one there. No one went by me. The windows in the bedroom were not disturbed, and my parents had too much stuff under the bed and in the closet for anyone bigger than an infant to hide in either spot. Also, after this, my mother never found the phone disturbed again. I went to college in Providence. My dorm room was my roommate and I, with beds opposite sides of the room and desks by the foot of the bed. The usual dorm setup. Anyway, my boyfriend and I were hanging out in my room one day and he was laying on my bed. I was up next to the bed and bent over to grab something. I heard him scream and freak out, holding his eyes, not exaggerating, and he wouldn't tell me why. Eventually he tells me that when I bent over he saw a shadow behind me that actually kind of looked like him and it freaked him out. He had an afro so the silhouette would have been pretty distinctive. We didn't really talk about it afterwards and never told my roommate. She wasn't in the room. A couple of weeks later, I'm asleep in bed with my boyfriend. I wake up in the middle of the night to my roommate packing a bag, clearly panicked. She kind of rushed out of the room and didn't see me awake so I didn't say anything. The next morning I see her and ask her why she rushed out of the room in the middle of the night. She then tells me she woke up in my middle of the night and saw my boyfriend sitting at my desk and asked him why he was up. She then saw my boyfriend sleeping next to me. She believed in ghost stuff so she freaked and left. It really freaked me out because we hadn't mentioned the lookalike my boyfriend saw to her and it sounded like she saw the same figure. Living in makes me see some weird shit. I have one story though I can explain it. I used to work as a security guard for an office building. Every once in a while, I'd do my rounds. Building would be completely empty except for me. Then I'd sit at the security desk and watch the cameras. But then the CFO would suddenly appear on the cameras. On the first floor, he would literally just appear in his office. Even after I had checked his office was empty, he'd walk around the first floor for a bit, go back to his office and completely disappear again. I'd go round the first floor, but I'd never see him in person. I'd only ever see him on the cameras. Used to scare the shit out of me. I ended up recording the CCTV and showed the security supervisor it, which led to HR questioning him about sneaking into the office after dark. Turned out, behind some filing cabinets in his office there was this little hatch door which led to this vertical passageway with a ladder that was connected to the basement. Guy got divorced the month before 8 lost the house. He was living in that tiny passageway with a sleeping bag. The basement in my dad's house is finished except for the storage room, which is really dark and creepy and is around the corner from the main room of the basement. There's an elliptical down there, and when standing on the elliptical, if you look over your shoulder, you can see half of the door to the storage room. I was working out on said elliptical and I felt like someone was standing behind me, so I looked over my shoulder. And in that half doorway, a dark figure with light gray eyes was standing there looking at me. I was house sitting, so I know there wasn't anyone else home. I slowly got off the elliptical and went into the bathroom to hide. Then a while later decided to be bold and rushed past the storage room and back upstairs. Not the first time I had seen that gray-eyed figure either. I've shared this story on Reddit before and I've been thinking about a lot lately. It's not exactly a scary thing I saw, but I still wonder about it all the time. So I'll copy and paste here. My best friend and I would always talk about crazy dreams we had. Never thought much of it until he told me about one where he got hit by a car and died. We were about 15 to 16 when he told me about the dream. We were into conspiracies, stuff like aliens, paranormal, lucid dreaming, so we'd talk about stuff like that a lot. And he died right before he would have turned 20. He said he was riding a skateboard wearing all black when the car hit him and could see everyone at his funeral. He even said his crush was at his funeral and laughed about it. He just kept going on about how it was so real. And it really shook me up until eventually I forgot about it. Then a few years later, after I'd long forgot about the dream he told me about, it happened for real. His crush was at his funeral. He did get hit by a car and die. He was wearing all black like in the dream, his work clothes, and he was riding my skateboard. It was all true. I still don't know what to make of it all. Every single detail I remember from his dream came true, and I'm sure there's parts of it he told me that I don't remember. I felt crazy. I didn't tell anyone about. I just don't know why or how he saw it happen in his dream, and think, what if he never told me about it? It just left me with so many questions. But I guess now I have proof, at least to myself, that our souls go on after we die. I just wish I knew why he experienced that dream and told me about it. There had to be some kind of reason. I just think about how I wouldn't believe this story if I hadn't experienced it for myself. Has anyone ever experienced anything similar? There was this abandoned house in the middle of nowhere. Like 30 minutes of back roads to find it, and no other people for at least 10 miles in any direction. Me and some friends used to go check out this spooky house and show it off to 1 or 2 new folks at a time. We did this 3 or 4 times. And as we're pulling up one night, a light in the house turned on. The house didn't have power any time we'd been there. And there were no vehicles anywhere around the house that night. Scared us all to the point none of us ever went back. In retrospect, it was probably being used as a hunting cabin or meth house. Although there was never any indication of either that we saw. And they probably just had the breaker off when they weren't there. A cat could have been parked behind in a place we couldn't see from the road. But as high school kids, nope. Spooky house with unexplained lights. I've been reading this thread and like 2 hours mysteriously vanished. That's all I got. Thanks for all the creepy stories. I love it. Copied from an old comment of mine. At one of my previous sysadmin jobs, we were closing down one of our smaller data centers as it was being consolidated into one of our larger ones. But we still had to have at least one person there in case of server issues that had to be dealt with on site. We rotated each week on which one of us would do the overnights. There, the place was reportedly haunted. By what I have no idea. Just heard rumors from other coworkers when I hired in. So imagine a relatively large open office space that is completely void of all the cubicles, desks, etc. that are normally there, with just one desk and a few random cables hanging from the ceiling. Also, just the lights over my desk were working and bleeding out into my surroundings by about 3 feet. That was where I was for the week. Lol. I remember sitting there and just hearing ambient noise from the sorta far-off server room. Fans, cooling system, etc. Working on a server for a customer of ours and seeing something dart across the room in my peripheral vision. I looked up and didn't see anything, so figured my eyes were just tired from the screen light. And making me see like those floaties when your eyes close too tightly. Went back to work and then about SM in later I saw it again. Although this time I heard the bathroom door open and shut. Big ass heavy door you pulled open and the mechanism at top of door pulled it shut. Thought maybe one of my coworkers was here for a server fix, so got up and went to greet them and wait for them. About 10 minutes pass and no one comes out of the bathroom. I go in to make sure they're not passed out or hurt. One of my coworkers suffered from seizures. But lo and behold, empty bathroom. Now I am creeped out. Leave the bathroom and this time see the shadow person thing on the other side of the room dart across again. But looking at it straight on and not from my peripheral vision. Quickly went over and threw the rest of the lights on and started searching the whole office and server room for a coworker, as I was 100% sure they were fucking with me. Never found anyone. Rest of the night was uneventful, as well as the rest of the week, minus me basically shitting bricks sitting at my desk waiting for something else to happen. Once I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. I could see the outline of someone standing there, but when I turned on the light, there was no one there. The door was still, slowly closing, as if whoever or whatever had been there was leaving. Even creepier, my Nest fire alarm had illuminated in the corridor, sensing movement, but there was nobody there. Still gives me chills thinking about it. When I was a kid, my grandpa was the night shift custodian of a big old school church building. My sister and I used to go with him some nights because they had a big gymnasium type room with a ton of big exercise balls and stuff, and it was fun to run around. One night while my grandpa was locking up a room, my sister and I heard a noise down the stairs behind us. We looked and there was an old lady leaving the building. She turns, looks at us, does the shish motion with her finger to her lips and leaves. We don't think too much of it at the time. We go to my grandpa and ask him if there was anyone else here tonight. Like any meetings, classes, etc. And he says nah, it's just us in the entire building. We ask him where the door down the stairs leads and he says, "Oh, that goes out to the cemetery." My sister and I freaked out. We still talk about it to this day and have the same memory of it. When I was 9 years old, I was biking home in the evening. We lived in the countryside up a small mountain. The road from the village was an uphill, a flat section and then another uphill. The road lights only stretched to the end of the flat section. I was a bit afraid of the dark, so I stopped at the end of the road lights just at the bottom of the last uphill to gather courage to bike the last section home. It was a partial moon, so it wasn't pitch black, and at the end of the uphill I saw a figure walking down towards me. I thought I'd wait until she got closer, as I would feel less afraid to bike in the dark if there was someone else close. But about halfway down the hill, the person walked into a thin shadow of a tree on the road and never came back out. Just disappeared. I stood there for a while trying to figure out what I just saw, and then panicked and biked down to the village and stayed there until my parents came driving and wondered why I never came home. They tried to explain it with stuff like the person might have gone into the woods or something. What they didn't disclose, though, out of fear that I'd never dare to bike home again, was that my father had seen the same thing walking home from work. He had seen her clear as day, walking down the hill for a while. When he looked down for just a second and looked up, she was gone, and there were no footsteps in the fresh snow. I later read a book about local legends, and apparently a lot of people during at least a century have seen her walking down the hill and disappearing halfway down. My youngest daughter loved this story, so we've been on ghost stakeouts, where we buy pizzas and snacks and hang out at the bottom of the hill listening to the Ghostbusters theme song and try to see the ghost. About 25 years ago, my now former wife and I were caretaking a house. We had been there for several weeks, and we both noticed that we always had that feeling coming up the stairs from the cellar that something was going to grab you as soon as you turned the light switch off. Everything else about the house was normal. We slept with an analog wind-up alarm clock next to the bed, the kind that actually ticks. To set the alarm, you move a tiny third hand to the location on the clock face for the desired time. For example, halfway between 6 and 7 to awaken at 6:30. It's a physical process and there is very little way to get it wrong. We always had the clock set to wake us up at 6 a.m. It was not something we fiddled with on a daily basis. One night, the alarm D-lock went off at like 2 in the morning. Old school ringing bells. Both my former wife and I woke up absolutely terrified. I saw a small figure, maybe 2 feet tall, run out of the room. I thought I must have been crazy until my former wife screamed, "Did you just see that thing?" We both described it as some sort of small gremlin. When we looked at the alarm clock, we saw that the alarm hand had been moved from 6 AM to 2 AM. That's the whole story. Scared the fuck out of me. Have no explanation for it. Nothing else ever happened there, but the cellar feeling persisted. Once when I was around 12, I was riding my bike on the trails near a golf course. There's high tension power lines going through the park, so a clearing runs through the forest. A car pulled through the clearing and I notice the back seat is full, but only the driver up front. They stop, everyone gets out and they drag a guy screaming out of the back seat, beat him up a bit and shot him twice. Once in the gut, for pain and suffering, I suppose, and once in the head. They stuff the dead guy back in the back seat. Everyone piles back into the car, just as before, and off they go. I stayed hidden in the brush, dumbfounded and scared to death, until they were out of sight. I go over to where the car had been. No mess at all, just tire tracks and footprints. Like it hadn't actually happened. I rode home and didn't tell anyone what I saw. After supper everyone got into whatever they were doing, so I went to my parents' BR to use the phone. Called 911 to report it. Told them I wanted to remain anonymous. They thanked me for the report and I hung up. Never heard anything about it on the news. They must have done a good job getting rid of the body. But I still find it weird that I couldn't see any remnants of what I'd just seen right in front of my own eyes. So, I've had this memory of watching a man murdered for close to 40 years now, and I think it has influenced my outlook on everything. So in college I studied in the UK. I lived in a house with a group of other American students that had stories of the ghost of a girl who passed away while living there. I never believed in any of it, but it was fun to play along. The kitchen had one way in and out, and right after you entered the kitchen to your right was a padlocked door to the cellar where she allegedly lived. I had the only key. We were all a little homesick near Thanksgiving, so decided to do a meal together. This required some creative cooking schedules due to small appliances in the kitchen. So one girl who didn't have class the next day offered to stay up late to get the turkey going. We went into the cellar the first and only time that evening to get larger cooking implements. At 2:04 in the morning, I wake up to my door rattling, like someone was pushing against it. I assumed it was a housemate who just went to the wrong door. About 30 seconds later, when I hear a scratchy female voice softly saying, "Hello?" every seconds or so. My window was open, and it sounded like it was coming from outside. So, I get up to close my window as I assume it's some drunk girl walking back from the pub. I get to the window, and there's no one there, and then I hear, "Hello?" clear as a bell behind me. My door rattles again, and goes silent. I've had night terrors before, and hallucinate when I have even a mild fever. So I assume I'm still asleep and lay back down. The next morning at 7 a.m., the girl who's cooking tells me I had the creepiest night. At 1:50 I heard footsteps coming up the cellar stairs. Then the door rattled. Then at 2:10 the door rattled again and I heard footsteps coming down. She told me this before I had said anything to anyone about what I'd experienced. I was maybe 10 years old, and my grandma had just died. I didn't really know her because she had spent most of my young life in a nursing home and often didn't remember who I was when I went to visit. But when I visited, she would always rub my back. It was sort of like an instinctual comfort thing. She'd dial it to all her kids and grandkids. For about a year after she died, I would be sitting in my room at night, alone, and start to feel someone rubbing my back like she used to. It freaked me out until one night when I acknowledged it and said, "Thank you, Grandma." It stopped after that and I never felt it again. I was about to cross the street. A lady put her arm across my chest and said, "Wait." As I look at her trying to figure out what is going on, a car crash happens and one of the cars goes tumbling down the street 2 feet in front of me. If she hadn't stopped me, I would absolutely be dead. I turned to look at her again, and she is no longer there. I could see for blocks in each direction. Nowhere she could have gone that fast where I wouldn't be able to see her. Only thing I can come up with is I imagined it happening in my memory due to how tragic the crash was. Never experienced anything even slightly supernatural before or after. Once I believe I was on the verge of psychosis from a 10-day bender with blow and handles of vodka, and saw a dark-looking figure over my bed, no eyes, no face, just a silhouette moving in jerky motions. Fast forward maybe 2 to 3 years, I get in a near-fatal solo car accident. During the day I see this same shifty silhouette. I was knocked unconscious and remember someone helping undo my seatbelt and helping me stand up. But when the police and ambulance got there, no one was there but me. I still have nightmares about this shit. My mom and I were driving up from Texas to Washington in late October. We stopped to rest in this national park in southern Colorado and were pretty much the only people there. It was usually daylight when we stopped to rest because my mom preferred driving at night. We were sitting there making something to eat when this guy on a bicycle went past us and just glared at us with these hate-filled eyes. My mom and I were pretty creeped out by him, but went on about our business and then laid down in the car to sleep. Her up front, and my boxer and I in the back seat. I got this feeling like I was being watched, and then my dog's hackles went up and she started this really deep down kind of growl. She only ever made that growl when she was really bothered by something. I reached over and chambered around in my shotgun, and my mom heard me and said, "Hey, are you awake? Do you want to get out of here?" And I said, "Hell yeah, I do." We got up and I stood guard with my shotgun and the dog when she packed everything into the car and we left. We couldn't see Hearn, but we could both feel him watch us, and the dog didn't settle down again until we'd left that place far behind. We made a beeline for Moab and stopped at this truck stop to rest instead. When we got up, we went in and got something to eat and met this really friendly trucker and told him what happened. He shadowed us north for quite a ways and then handed us off to other truckers. They shadowed us all the way to Idaho. They were all a great bunch of guys for sure. It's not scary but unexplainable. When I was 10, I got into a motorcycle accident. I wasn't driving it. I was walking from school when a motorcycle hit me going full speed. I did see the motorcycle come, but I froze up and couldn't move. When it had hit me, I flew pretty far and remember someone catching me when I fell down. When I got up and looked around, I didn't see anyone, and witnesses told the cops I flew at least 6 feet and fell head first on the ground. My head was fine, just had a broken collarbone. Thankfully, my parents believed me when I told them. Roughly 15 years ago, I was in upstate NY with my uncle at our family house. It's pretty quiet and not a lot of people are up there. My uncle and I were outside when it started to downpour, so we went inside. We were looking out the front door together, and my uncle was commenting how hard it was raining. This is also pretty rural, so it's mostly pitch black out with only our front house light illuminating the front area. As we are looking out the door, we both see someone on the road sort of speed walking. It's so dark, but their skin was so pale. We can see their hands sway as they walked, and then their face as they turned towards our house. All remember was the face had no eyes. My uncle quickly shut the door and said not to worry, it was probably someone who got out stuck in the rain. I was scared, but he calmed me down. I was little, so I don't remember too much after that other than my uncle keeping watch for a while after that. I forgot about this story until years later when I brought it up to him because I thought maybe it was a dream. His attitude changed when I brought it up, and he just said he remembered but didn't want to talk about it. I have never brought it back up to him. And to this day now, when I think about it, I feel really airy.